A Build Hatch developed production.
Hello, I'm Aaron Kyle and welcome to another episode of Build Hatch. On this week's episode of Build Hatch, I got to sit down and chat with Rob from Builder's Edge Consulting, who is based in Melbourne. Rob has a very interesting story and talks about his motivation and purpose in helping Victorian trades in obtaining their builder's license. In this week's episode, we discuss the benefits of having Rob and his team hold people accountable and push them to have the very necessary time to pass the exams. You also hear how tough it actually is to obtain your builder's license in Victoria. Like I said, Rob has a very diverse background and, as you'll hear, is very methodical and an excellent planner, which says a lot about Builder's Edge Consulting and his team. So let's get into it. Rob from Builder's Edge Consulting, welcome to Build Hatch.
Thank you for having me.
We're recording this in your Carrum Downs office and obviously on the Mornington Peninsula in southern Melbourne, if you like. So lots of construction activity going on down that way, that's for sure. So before we hear your story, Rob, we always like to take it back to the very beginning and learn a lot about our guests, where they grew up, where they came from. So whereabouts did you grow up?
Right back to the start. Born and bred in Kerikeri in the Bay of Islands in New Zealand. Grown up as a child, moved around a bit with my mum. She remarried when I was about 12 and to a farmer. So ended up sort of growing up my teenage years on about 2,500 acres out the back of a little town called Kawakawa.
That'd be half of New Zealand, wouldn't it?
What, 2,500 acres? Yeah. It was about 11 k's up the end of a dirt road. So that was good. It was good place as a teenager or a young teenager to grow up. Learned a lot of life skills early on. A lot of skills from my dad as well. He was a chef. Owned a very well-known restaurant in Kerikeri, and sort of growing up on the farm and buying old cars and hooning them around the paddocks and making things that we probably shouldn't have made and things like that. So it was good. Went to Bay of Islands College. Ended up leaving there halfway through my final year. And moved out of home, lived with my sister in Kerikeri. Went to a little tiny private school for the back half of that final year just to try and get my grades.
So this is kind of like year 11 and 12?
Yeah, it would have been year 12. Well, it was actually in New Zealand, it's year 13. So back then it was called Form 7. So I always wanted to go to university, and back then it was I needed 3 C's to get my bursary entrance to go to university. And yeah, it was about halfway through that year that I just had lost complete interest in school altogether. I started working for the old man quite early on in the restaurant, probably when I was about 14, just working on the weekends, and Thursday nights the Rotary would come in for their conferences, so doing dishes and prepping food and things like that. And the restaurant that he was running was part of a big motel, so in the summer I sort of spent most summers just mowing the lawns there and painting and just sort of doing maintenance around the place, cleaning the pool, all of that. I think the school just probably, I don't know, I think one of my teachers was out for quite a few months, and I think it was biology I was doing. Basically the whole thing was being done just with a temporary teacher. Everything was being faxed in. So I kind of lost interest, wanted to sort of move on and do something else.
What were you sort of hoping for to do like at university?
I don't know, kind of whatever the flavour of the month was. If I'd been watching a bit of CSI on TV, then I wanted to go and be a scientist and forensic scientist and things like that. So it did change a lot. I didn't really have any clear, I suppose, passion or goal in that respect. And then when I sort of went to this little private school, probably didn't make things better because I went from probably girls got in the way at that point and things. So, but I got my 3 C's and then also ended up in, I suppose, at that age was quite a serious relationship with my girlfriend, and decided not to go to university and have a gap year. The gap year turned into 2 gap years, but it was good. I worked on a game fishing charter boat out of Pai here for about 12 months.
So still sort of hung around New Zealand.
Yeah, still hung around the Bow Islands. The first thing I did when I finished school and didn't know what I wanted to do, there was a course, 6-month course that was designed for sort of young, teenage age, troubled kids. And it was run by the Kerikeri Polytech. And it was a free course. It was funded by the government. And it was basically 6 months of sailing, diving, fishing, kayaking, things like that, and learnt a lot of fun stuff to do.
And lots
a
of
lot
practical skills too
Oh,
there.
real practical. And at the end of that, I was actually approached by one of the teachers to his assistant was leaving, and he wanted me to come on board and basically help him run the course as one of the teachers. So I jumped on that, and that was awesome. At the time, I guess it was something to do to help me find what I wanted to do. And then, ended up making the decision to go to university and study construction management. So I went to Unitec in Auckland, moved there. It was a 4-year degree, and it was designed so you started working. Well, you could start working for a construction company basically after your first year. So the first year was kind of full-time study, and then it sort of broke down into, they tried to jam all the classes into sort of 2 days a week. So then you could work 3 days a week for a builder. And then in the holidays and whatnot, you could work full-time for the builder.
Yeah, I really like that because it's probably quite common, particularly in Australia. There's only really a handful of institutions or universities that actually promote that. I mean, they sort of take sometimes a bit of a lazy approach to it, and they sort of say, well, here are your classes, this is what you're learning, and kind of will help make an introduction to a couple of builders if you like, or will advertise for some cadet positions or summer programs. But I think that's very important to go that extra mile like that and sort of design the course around encouraging that from very early on through the course.
Yeah, it was good. And I mean, the first year at uni, there was a lot of sort of generic papers, teamwork and information technology and things like that. But yeah, once, especially in the second year, like you kind of had to be working for a builder to get access to the information and the projects and the expertise in order to do your assignments, and your assessments, because a lot of our assessments were based on sort of real life examples and using real jobs. So unless you were working for a builder, I mean, you'd have to sort of go out there and contact builders and try and get them to give you their time to help with your assessment. So and that was good. And I went from being pretty much scraping through school. I mean, I'm pretty sure the only reason I got my 3 C's in my last year of school was because I actually got rounded up because I was the anomaly of getting such a low mark. They just sort of rounded me up. So
I love how you talk about C's. Like it's all. I presume C means competent. So it's
no, this was it was the old A B C D E F.
yeah, right.
So the
So
C's were,
middle ground.
C's were, I think, 45% to 55% or 60%. So it wasn't even half. And I barely got it. But in my first year of uni, I won an award by the New Zealand Institute of Building, top of my degree. And then I think the second and third year I won the same award or other awards as well. So I went from being basically bottom of the barrel to doing something I absolutely loved. Every assignment, every exam's going to freak me out a little bit, so I'd study like there was absolutely no tomorrow. And just got stuck in and loved everything that I was learning, and I could apply everything because I was working in the industry. So that really helped. And I actually got approached for my first job in my second year to go and work for a small shop fitting company. And, a lot of my mates we had quite a tight-knit group of sort of guys that we'd all become friends. And A lot of them were working for the real big companies like Fletcher's and Mainzil and things. And I was just working for this little shop fitting company, but it was kind of good because they threw me in the deep end. You know, the first sort of couple of weeks on the job was like, oh, here, this is how we price a job, and use the spreadsheets and send out to subbies to get quotes and whatever, and sort of put it all together and help the director sit down and finalize it all. And then the next week is like, oh, we got the job. Here's the plans. Go and build it.
Yeah, that's that real life practical experience that I was talking about earlier, not sort of having, as I recall, I mean, they were, generally speaking, they were quite good fun because they were, involved a lot of drinking and partying. But I remember when it came time to studying surveying, and it was go away for 4 nights up the coast, which kind of turned into a bit of a surfing and partying expedition, but surveying a caravan park and a cabin camping ground sort of thing on the beach. And I mean, as fun as it was at the time, it's not a very practical real life introduction to surveying in the real building sphere.
Yeah, and I was lucky. The group of 6 or 7 of us that became quite good friends at uni, we would all catch up and do study together and help, with our own assignments. And we had various. They worked for various companies and various offices and side offices around the city, so we would always catch up and do study together and help each other out. And we're all still, we all still keep in touch, even to this day. And it's good to sort of see them go out, and a lot of them are starting to reach quite high positions in some of those companies, and a couple have gone out and started their own quite successful construction company themselves. So it's good. It's been a good bunch of guys.
Did you last the 4 years full time at uni?
Yeah. So it got to the end of the 4th year, and by that stage, I'd booked my trip overseas, which was sort of the big OE. Landed in London, and my girlfriend at the time, I think we'd only been together 6 months. She ended up sort of hightailing it out of Auckland as well. Got her 2 year. So Kiwis get a 2-year visa, working visa, to go to the UK. So she got that, and I just met her there, and we stayed with my mum's cousin, who I maybe met once in my life. So we kind of landed on her doorstep with her family, and got a little house sitting gig for a couple of months, and ended up living in London for 2 years. And I struggled to get a job at the start. My wife, she's now my wife, but girlfriend at the time, she got a job straight away, and I went through a bit of a down patch. I didn't have any money. I sort of sat on the couch and watched Top Gear. I was amazed that Top Gear was on. Like, there was a channel that just had Top Gear on it.
Replays all
Coming
day.
from New Zealand with its 3 channels, and it was amazing. So I definitely got stuck in that for probably a few weeks. But I ended up getting a job in construction recruitment. I actually gave that a nudge. I must say I learned a lot, but recruitment's not for me. Selling isn't for me.
It's a bit different over in the UK too. Like I have a little bit of inside knowledge into how it works over there, and it's always changing. But I guess particularly around London, generally speaking, if you're involved in sort of large construction, generally commercial construction, you actually contract as a contractor through a recruitment agency who then hires you onto that head contractor.
Yeah, there's a lot of contracting work. Yeah. And to be fair, I mean, I didn't really know what recruitment was. I didn't know that you could pay another company to find you someone to work for you. Coming from New Zealand, I looked in the paper or online, and sort of sent your CV in and had interviews and got the job, or you knew people. So I was kind of astounded that companies would pay how much they pay in recruitment fees. But as I said, probably the biggest thing I learned from recruitment is I learned to not be afraid to pick up the phone and talk to a stranger in a normal way. And that's very much a life skill that I still use a lot today. I was good at it because I came from construction, so I knew what people were talking about. I was the only person in that office that actually had been in construction.
So you could talk their language essentially.
Yeah, just understand what they were looking for and what they were wanting and those kind of things. We were there for 2 years. We thought, oh, why not instead? We weren't quite ready to go back to New Zealand. Um, not sure what that means, but we just didn't feel we wanted to go back and live back in Auckland or wherever we would live. So basically, just looked at a map and thought, oh, Australia would be quite cool. It's close enough to home. It's only a couple of hours if we have to fly for whatever reason to see family. Far enough away that we're kind of not with family. So kind of threw a dart at Melbourne. I jumped on Seek, inquired about a couple of jobs in construction recruitment, and actually got a phone call the next day from a couple of guys that were from a Melbourne construction company that were in the UK doing interviews to bring people over. So I think 3 days later, I was meeting them in a pub for an interview, and the next day I had a contract and relocation costs.
Wow, that's a handy way to get back too.
Yeah, it kind of escalated from being an idea and throwing a dart at the map to moving to Melbourne. I'd never been to Melbourne before, and spent Christmas, New Year's with our families, and moved to Melbourne with our couple of bags on the 22nd of January 2012. Yeah, been here ever since. We had absolutely no money. I got a bank account with Westpac with the contract that I had for the job that I hadn't even started yet, and they gave me a credit card of $2,500, which I took to an ATM, got a cash advance to pay our bond on our little furnished flat that we found in Chinatown. And then I started my job at the end of the month. Alicia got a temp contract with BHP to start with, and then the next year we realised we wanted to get a car and do some exploring, so we moved to Richmond, which was only a couple of k's out. Got a car, got a dog. Needed something bigger than that little townhouse, so ended up in Hawthorn, then Hawthorn East. So every year we kind of moved out a little bit further, and and then we sort of realised that we want to buy something, and we liked the beach, so we jumped in the car, drove down Beach Road until we found a town that we liked, which was Mordialloc. And by that stage, I think I started Builder's Edge. I was in construction recruitment for 1.5 years, and then I got a job with the HIA. So that was probably a big turning point for me, getting a job with them, the Housing Industry Association.
So you got to sort of go back on the inside, if you like, and have a real grassroots sort of perspective on what's going on in the industry as opposed to sort of being a resource.
Yeah, I was really going down probably a bit of a dark patch in recruitment, because it was all numbers driven and trying to make sales and deals,
Commissions.
and and I just wasn't learning a thing, and I felt I'd really distanced myself too far away from what I love, which was construction. Getting that job with the HIA, was a massive turning point for me mentally. It really sort of turned me around, really sort of lifted me back up again, and I loved it there. Being surrounded by experts in the field. The guys in the legal team, the training team, the technical team. Again, probably got thrown in the deep end a little bit. I had to suddenly learn what registration was, and in terms of licensing, and run these courses and sell memberships and teach people how to get their registration. So that was a big learning curve. I did a lot of research, spent a lot of time, listening to recordings and talking about things. But the exposure that the HIA gave me, and having that brand behind you, really allowed me to really enjoy construction again.
So tell me about Builder's Edge. What was sort of the, I guess, starting point or the motivation behind starting Builder's Edge Consulting?
I always wanted to start my own business before we started a family. I didn't like the idea of trying to start a business whilst having dependents. That was obviously a bit scary, that thought. So I kind of just bit the bullet and went and started my own thing. So I started Builder's Edge basically when we were on our honeymoon in South America. It was kind of come up with the name, and one of the ways that got me to start the business or come up with the courage to start the business was I told friends and family that I was going to start a business. And I figured if I tell enough people, I wouldn't be able to turn back from it.
Yeah,
Um,
very clever.
so, so it was kind of self-imposed pressure. And so, yeah, just bit the bullet one day and sort of, started the company. We were fortunate. We were doing the Inca Trail in South America, and there was a really nice couple from Adelaide, um, Aaron and Megan, and he was an accountant, and I picked his brain for 4 days
While you're
whilst walking
walking.
the Inca Trail. He was probably trying to have a holiday, but yeah, I was just picking his brain, everything to do with companies and trusts and everything like that. And after a couple of days, I said to him, you know, can you be my accountant when we get back? So yeah, and he still is today. They've become good friends of ours, and obviously up until COVID, would regularly see them. Um, he's definitely a one of the rocks behind the business. Him and his team. Um, I can't, and it's advice I use to our guys today, our clients coming through, being builders and starting their businesses, is to get a very good accountant on board, because it just changes your world to have that foundation from a business perspective. So that was a big help having him on board. He really did help me start up the business. Obviously, my wife too. She gave me, her full support to go at the equipment job, knowing that we were basically trying to start a family. Yeah, and I was lucky. People tracked me down. Old people, clients from the HIA. I went out, sourced new work. Just had my car, my laptop. Yeah, just tried to focus on sort of one person at a time and try and build up a good quality service, which was, help them with their applications, do all the legwork, do all the hard stuff, give them quality material, and fully support them one on one through that exam and interview process, which is what's required to get your registration here.
So, Rob, when you took this plunge, you obviously had some connections and contacts. You picked the brain out of your accountant that you met overseas, and then you would have had access or had a pretty good network of subbies or trades.
One of the key, I suppose, contacts I had was a contact I'd made through another training company, Builders Academy, and they they actually approached me to come and do basically training for them, for their students, to basically coach their students go through the process. So what I kind of ended up, I suppose, negotiating with them was that I would go around to all of their classes around Victoria, so all of their Cert 4 and diploma classes, and do presentations uh, on the process to get your registration. So those sort of 2-hour presentations, I would run through what's required to be registered, and experience-wise and knowledge-wise, and what the application involved, and the exam and the interview, and things like that. And I really use that as a way to share the straight, true information about how to become a registered builder in Victoria. Because even still today, that is one of probably the most misinformed processes that's out there. There's all sorts of stories and all sorts of misinformation in Victoria about what you actually need to become a registered builder, and what the process actually is and how it actually works. So, that was sometimes 2, sometimes 4 nights a week that I was going out and presenting to these night classes around the whole state. And that I did that for 4 years. I only stopped doing that last year for them. And that was good. That obviously gave me a lot of exposure. But it also kind of helped my mission, which was to share the true information and try and get rid of a lot of the myths and the stories that are out there.
I have to say, having sort of clients and connections all around Australia, but particularly the East Coast, Victoria, without a doubt, is the most toughest and stringent
Hmm.
facilitator of obtaining your builder's license.
And I don't see it as a bad thing.
Certainly not.
It stems from the legislative system in the state, though, because particularly in other states like Queensland, um, there's more protection for the consumer. So consumers can use their home warranty insurance simply if there's a defect, for instance, that's been caused by the builder, and they can use that insurance, and the insurer will then go after the builder. But in Victoria, with our domestic building insurance or a homeowner's warranty insurance, essentially the builder has to have died, disappeared, or gone bankrupt. So I think part of it stems from the legislative system, but also it needs to be hard. I mean, people don't realize the responsibilities that a builder takes on. They're huge. They're very much underestimated. Yeah, I'm glad that it's hard. Obviously, it keeps me in business, but people learn a lot. There's one particular volume builder who encourages their supervisors to come through us and get their registration because they know that they actually become better supervisors because of the stuff that they learn. They learn how to use the building code, what to look out for. They learn about the actual building process, the permits, the inspections, and how it all fits into a legislative system. So
That's an attitude that's coming from a place of not being fearful of training your people up and they jump ship and go out on their own. It's actually having an
mm,
appreciation and understanding of why you need to know this.
it's a silly mentality to think that you guys are going to go out and start their own company and be competition to a volume builder. You can't just become a volume builder. Um, you know, the volume builders are the volume builders. They've got what they do in their clientele, and custom builders have theirs, and the high end builders have theirs. So, as far as I'm concerned, there's enough work for everybody. You find your niche, you find what you like to do, and you stick to it.
So, what about for the people listening to this who are working as a chippy or might be a plasterer or working as a foreman or a supervisor? What sort of services are you able to provide? Because one of the key questions that comes up on your website is looking to get your builder registration and don't know where to start. So
Yeah,
that's a very important question.
experience. So the large number of phone calls and emails I get on a daily basis, my first question to anybody, they'll often ask me, what can I do for them, and how much does it cost, and all that kind of stuff. But I don't answer any of that because my first question to them is, tell me about your background and your experience, because that's one thing I can't change. I can't change someone's background, and I can't change someone's experience. I'll ask them what it is they want to do with their registration. If they had their registration tomorrow, what type of work would they be looking to do? Because some people, or most people, want the DBU, the Domestic Builder Unlimited, but people don't realize that even just a limited category might allow them to do the things that they want to do. But they don't know that. It's very hard to find that information anywhere. So I definitely try to educate them at the very start and find out about their experience, and their background and what they want to do. And if I feel it matches up, then I'll talk to them further about how we can help. If it doesn't, then I'll advise them on where those gaps are and what they need to do to go and fill those gaps. And it's amazing how many people really appreciate, me just not saying, sorry, I can't help you, and hang up. I actually try and advise them what to go and do. And now I've had Builder's Edge for 5 years. I get people ringing me up now that I might have spoken to 2 or 3 years ago. And they go, I've taken your advice. I've, gone and I've been working under a builder, and I've supervised a few jobs, etc. I'm now ready to apply for my registration.
Yeah, that's great.
Taken my advice, they've gone and actually done something about it, realized that, they need to put in the yards or whatever it is, filled in those gaps. And then they'll successfully get their registration, and they're stoked. But they understand that it doesn't happen overnight.
No, well, that's so true. And all right, so say in that example, then, if I'm listening to this and I've rung you up, you've then sort of set me on my path to go and obtain that certain amount of experience with, generally speaking, is some supervisory or some small scale project management and certain particular projects. So then what happens?
Yeah, so then I'll basically explain to them and say, look, well, the first thing we do is we do everything. So we do your application, we fill out all the forms, we do all the boring stuff like your police check, we fill out the reference form, we give you checklists of what we need and how we need it. and then we put together the application, we submit it to the VBA, and then we basically say we give you most of the books, not all of them, because copyright and legal issues, some we can't give, but we give them most of the books in a study pack that we put together. So it's even got a pencil case in it with highlighters and pencils and sticky tabs and things like that. Set them up on our online study portal and do one-on-one study sessions to get them ready for their exam and their interview.
So how far is that generally out from say the exam?
So we do things a bit different to obviously our competitors out there. So we do the application first and submit it, and then whilst we're waiting for the VBA to book them in, that's when we do the study, which is usually give or take about 2 months. Obviously, the VBA being the VBA, sometimes it's 1 month, sometimes it's 6 months, but on average, probably around 2 to 3 months. So that's the time we spend to get them ready for the exam. And then once they're through that, then we get them ready for the interview. And that normally happens about 2 to 3 months after as well. So we generally say from essentially signing up with us to getting the registration, it is a 4 to 6 month process.
So describe, I guess, the exam format of there's a written exam followed up by a practical exam.
It's just recently moved online. They've been having technical issues over the last month, and so they still do the face-to-face exams at the VBA as backup. But basically, the exam is a 2-hour exam. Half of it is multiple choice on a computer traditionally, and the other half is they'll give you a set of drawings and plans, and you would use your books to design slabs and mark up roofs and use your span tables to work things out. It's interesting, the exam and the exercises, because a lot of it isn't really that practical. A lot of it is theoretical. I get it. I get why they do it, but a lot of people don't. So it is an interesting one. But yeah, they've just moved the whole thing online. So you actually sit at your computer, and there's a supervisor from an external moderating exam company that actually watches you do the exam online. So they kind of set you
it's
up.
like uni. They watch you through your camera. You allow them
Yeah,
access, and they make
yeah.
sure that Rob from Builder's Edge isn't on the phone helping you.
Yeah, and you got to show them around your desk, and you got to rip up the piece of paper afterwards that you've written notes on in front of them and things like that. But unfortunately, we're talking about the construction industry here, and they're still getting used to Zoom, let alone having some random dude watch them, on their computer. So it's definitely been met with its challenges. We have contact with the VBA, and we give them constructive feedback on what's good about changes like that and what's not, and what they can do to improve and things like that. So, but yeah, so we like to be on the forefront of that stuff. So as soon as they found out, or we found out they were doing online exams, we jumped on straight away. We worked out how to do it ourselves. We read all the instructions, just tried to really make sure that, we knew they were booking people in fast for it. So we looked at all of our clients that had just submitted applications, and we got them all in a group together and said, look, this is what's happening. Let's make sure that they've got everything they need to get through it. So that's the good thing about being one-on-one and only having, I suppose, a relatively small number of people going through the processes. We can ring everyone up individually, and there's only 3 people you'll deal with at Builder's Edge: is myself, Lauren, she's probably named herself our sort of client manager, and then John's our training guy. So there's only the 3 of us you'll ever deal with.
And is that a weekly thing that we, if I'm enrolled into your program?
Study wise, no. We try and break down that barrier of having to jump online at night time and sit in the class or anything like that. So we kind of design it so we give you, I suppose, self-directed study to do to start with, and then we do our first study session. So that way we know you've at least gotten yourself up to speed with some of the basic terminology, and then the study sessions are just led basically by John, the training guy, and the client. So we focus on things that people are struggling with personally. I mean, if we've got someone who's a carpenter by trade, then it's going to be very quick and easy for us to run through with them, the bracing, using span tables. I'm not going to have to explain to them, why we need double studs under a girder truss, because being a carpenter, they're going to pick up on that stuff in the terminology really quickly. But generally speaking, this is a generalization, the areas that carpenters will struggle with is going to be the building permits, the contracts, the OH&S, all of the sort of the back end stuff, and slabs to a point, concreting. But then if we get someone who's a supervisor or a project manager who's come from that background, they might have experience in applying for building permits. So, we'll check that they know about the process and what's involved. And then we know for those guys, we're going to have to focus a lot more on the carpentry side of things because they're not carpenters. So that's why I started Builder's Edge and why I avoided any form of, I suppose, classroom-based learning, because if you get a classroom full of people and half of them are carpenters and half of them are not, half of them are going to be listening and the other half's not.
Yeah, look, that's
So
a very good point. It's about customizing it and making it into a form of understanding that practical guys, because let's face it, most guys that, I would say probably the majority of builders out there go through that old school route of, the non-university level. They go out and become chippies or other trades. So it's about, I guess, creating that practicality and ease and access for those guys to be able to, after a hard day at the office, which, let's face it, in Australia in particular, working, in hot days in summer and cold days in winter, and the last thing you feel like is doing some study at the end of the day. So
that's the thing, we it's funny, our study sessions are only done during normal business hours. And initially people are like, oh, but I'm working. I'm like, yeah, but they only go for an hour. Like, it's an hour, it's short and sharp. Even if you've got to sit in the car with a laptop and hotspot, just for a quick Zoom meeting, we give the guys it's a carry-on suitcase with all their books in it. Everything they need is in that suitcase. Just take the suitcase with you everywhere you go. But then people start to realize that they've actually learnt a lot more in that hour during normal business hours than they would have sitting at the computer at 8 o'clock at night, after, as you say, the hard day's work, putting the kids to bed and all that kind of stuff. So, and we let them book it in now. So, yeah, so they can see our diaries and what's available, and they just book themselves in, and then they get all the reminders, the text reminders and the email reminders. So that helps a lot too. That's really sort of smoothed our processes and things like that. So.
yeah, well, the benefit of that is it allows people to be efficient with their time, and by the time someone sends an email or text saying, tell me when you're available, and then they say right back and say, yeah, this is when I'm available, and it doesn't work. You both have an app or access to, and Calendly is one of them, where you can just book in a time. You can slots in your day when you are available or are unavailable. It's just about being efficient.
And the only way to still provide that real high level of one-on-one service is to get those types of small efficiencies like Calendly and things like that, to try and make sure that people still are getting that customized one-on-one service and they don't get left behind. Occasionally we have people that do get left behind, so we just really try to make sure that we can minimize that at all areas, especially if you've got 10 people studying for their exams, 10 people studying for their interviews, another 10 people in between. We need to make sure that everyone's at the right stages, because, again, we don't have class intakes or group intakes. We start when someone wants to start.
So it's customized one-on-one first class
Yeah.
service.
Yeah, because people say, oh, when's your next intake? When can I start? And I'm like, mate, start tomorrow if you want. Like, it doesn't matter. It's funny, people sort of don't quite understand sometimes how the one-on-one works. I'm like, we can start whenever you like.
Okay, so is it just that DBU or is it the DBL as well?
Yeah, we do the DBLs. So I introduced myself quite early on in Builder's Edge to Carpentry Australia. And the reason I did that was because the Carpentry Australia have a very heavy social media following. And I found myself trying to correct some of their comments on Instagram. There was, someone they would post something and someone would comment about something to do with when you need to have a contract or when you need to be registered or when you need to have a permit and things like that. And, DBL was useless. You can't do anything with it. And so I was sort of jumping in just as an outsider trying to correct some of that information, saying, well, no, actually, if you've got a DBL, it means you're a builder and it means you can have contracts and blah, blah, blah. And so I actually rung them up and I said, look, do you want someone just sitting on the outside who you can refer these people onto just to answer questions, or do you want to do a news article or something just to help correct some of this misinformation? And that was the start of a great working relationship, which we still have. So we, I guess, Builders Edge sort of contracts to Carpentry Australia to do. So anyone that comes through them, we do all their registration stuff. But we also do group training for them. So they do run a group session just for DBLs, or DBL, so Domestic Builder Limits, just to Carpentry. So every month we do a 7-week, I suppose, crash course on applying for your DBL registration. And that's great, to have what is now an online community of, 10, 15, 20 guys a month, all chippies. It's great banter. We're all learning, they're learning great stuff. They really get a good understanding of the DBL and what they can actually do with it and how it works. And, we've been doing that for 2.5 years now. It's hard since COVID. I can't work out how many years have gone past.
It's because we've basically lost 2.
I know. I can't. Yeah. It's sort of,
We're writing off 2020
yeah,
or
the last 18
2021.
months have merged into kind of 1 year somehow. But yeah, so that's been really good, and now a lot of those guys are coming back and getting their DBUs, so they've gotten their DBLs, they've gone and done the small jobs, the renos and the extensions and that kind of stuff, and now they're coming back and saying, I'm now ready for my DBU, let's do it. So it's great to see those people, grow like that. And we get a lot of young guys in the class, which is great because, and that's a big thing that Carpentry Australia have always been pushing for is to have some form of formalized process to become a builder, but also a formalized process to become a recognized carpenter. So yeah, they're very passionate about what they do, and it's been good to get behind them and sort of support them about trying to make carpentry. But I would probably say they almost represent all the trades in that respect to become as equally recognised as plumbers and electricians.
Yeah, very important. All right, Rob. So, what about pricing structure? I mean, people listening to this will be thinking this is great. First-hand insight, sort of guide me through the process. How much is it to How does a typical, whether it's a DBU or DBL, what's the typical price point for those?
Typical price point for a DBU is 3,500 plus GST. We spread the payments out across 3/3, and sort of the front half of the whole process. So that just kind of allows guys with cash flow and things like that, and it keeps us on board as well to make sure that we're following them through and chasing them up to try and get their applications through. But yeah, it generally sits around that price point. Sometimes people will apply for multiple categories, or the DBLs, or sometimes we get guys that, or particularly brothers, that want to do it together. So we sort of can accommodate and change things around really as much as we need to, well, as we like to. So
Do you measure like a strike rate? Like, if people listen to this and think, well, I asked the tricky questions, but
no, that's a good question. Yeah, yeah.
what sort of strike rate do you sort of measure success and performance, which is basically pass or fail?
Yeah, and that's the good thing about what we do is I suppose it is measurable. You either get your registration or you don't. I've naturally tried to only take on people that we believe can get their registration. That's why I ask a lot of the questions at the very, very start about their experience. One of the common questions I get asked as well is why do people fail? But to answer your question, we do have a strike rate. Do I worry about it? Not particularly. The last time I measured it was around 97%. So it is high, and I do credit that to our team. It's also been a bit higher over the last 18 months because of COVID, strangely enough, because we can't do anything else. People study.
That's right. They have time.
They have time, but they don't have time. It's a funny world we live in right now. Yeah, we have time, but we don't. But yeah, essentially, people have more free time. So that has meant that our strike rate, I guess, is a bit higher. But it's not something I worry about. Or we, I should say, as a team of three of us, we do take it quite personally and quite hard if someone doesn't get their registration. We can be quite brutal with people. Um, John, who does all our training, if he's picking up quite early on that someone's not doing the work, he sends me a message and I ring that person up and give them a gentle, uh,
Nudge.
a gentle nudge.
Well,
Uh,
some people need that, Rob. Like, that's what you need.
it depends why. So we've had, sometimes it's because things have happened, you know, personal situations, work situations. It's just becoming a bit too much. That's fine. Like, and if they've come to us being honest about their problems, then I'll do everything in my power to help them in any way, shape I can. The ones that just, I guess, come up with excuses. We've been doing this for 5 years. We've probably dealt with, yeah, I don't know. I don't count upwards of 500 people, if not more, in terms of the one-on-one stuff. You can tell when someone's been genuine and when someone's not. And we've always said we will go out of our way as much as we need to help someone that is helping themselves. Anyone that's trying, we will try harder. But if you're not trying, then you're going to get 2, maybe 3 warnings from me, and then we'll just stop and we'll move on and commit our time to helping someone who wants to be helped. Yeah, it's funny like that. I don't get it. I don't get why you'd pay the money and sign up and go through this process.
Yeah, well, I guess you and I, we've been a university, tertiary educated. I guess there's a lot of people out there who haven't had exposure to that. So for some people who they might be at 23, some might be 43, it's their first and only real sort of experience to studying. And I mean, a lot of these guys rely on having plans in their head and thinking on with their brain on their feet, tool in hand, and so having to actually go back and apply a different level of thinking. I guess they can struggle with that, and then throw in everything else. Like at the end of the day, if you're a sole trader or working for yourself, you need to bring food on the table. So other
Yeah,
things do get in the way, but that comes back to your recruitment background and like you say, just being able to find what ticks the boxes and what helps them and motivates them and holding them accountable. And that's a great investment. 3.5 grand to have someone there to make you accountable. This is lifting you to a whole different level, forcing you to constantly calibrate and understand what you're learning.
yeah. And it's someone asked me not that long ago about sort of what's been one of the common different between why people pass or fail. I've seen people from all walks of life get their registration. And obviously, sometimes people don't get it first time around. But what separates the people that fly through the process and come out the other side is got nothing to do with their background and their experience. It's that they really wanted it.
Commitment.
It's the people that really want it will get it. And it's funny because I'll always ring our guys the day before their exam or their interview for a chat. And a lot of them are like, oh, how you feeling? So I'm nervous. I'm like, it's good. Like, why? And I'm like, because it means you want it.
That's right.
Like, nerves are good. I said, if you weren't nervous, then I'm nervous. Yeah. So there's a flaw in what we do, unfortunately, because obviously our entire goal is to help people navigate the rigmarole of getting them their registration. But you mentioned before that Victoria is one of the hardest states to get your registration, and that's great. And like every other state, getting your license or registration, it's got nothing to do with using it. And I think that's where the industry falls down a lot. They give them their registration or give them their license and expect them to go out there and somehow build and not stuff up.
Yeah, look, it's a tough gig. It's a tough industry, and it's tough for a reason. And yes, there's plenty of work out there and demand, but you're playing with the big boys. It's operating a business as a builder. It's not just getting that ticket and off you go skipping, off to Disneyland. It's a tough world out there. It's full of great white sharks. If you're not being eaten up by your clients, you're being eaten up by your subbies, you're being eaten up by local government areas. Like it's
Yep.
the
The
real deal out
engineers,
there.
the
It's a war
surveyors.
zone.
Yep.
Everyone.
Yep.
Yeah, it's cutthroat and
Yep.
it's like I said, playing with the big boys. It's
Yep.
tough. For it, you need to be committed, and people need to understand just what sort of world it is. Once you get that license, it's a tough world out there.
It is very much so.
Rob, it's been great to sit down and have a chat with you, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. We've been trying to line this up for a while, and
I know.
and it's so good to catch up with you and sit here and talk to you. So for the people listening to this who want to reach out, get into contact with you, what's the best way to go about it?
Website is probably the easiest one. That's got all my contact details on it, and there's a contact form on there, which is buildersedge.com.au. Or just email robert@buildersedge.com.au. It's pretty easy.
Very easy. So, Rob, like I said, it's been really nice to sit down and talk to you here, and I think a lot of people, particularly carpenters who are looking at making that plunge, going to the next step.
Yeah, and always open for a chat, even if someone wants to get their registration at some point but isn't sure where they stand experience-wise. I'm always happy just to have that chat and try and point them in the right direction.
All right, fantastic. Well, Rob from Builder's Edge, thanks again for coming on to Build Hatch.
Thanks, Aaron.
Well, that was another Build Hatch episode with myself and Rob from Builder's Edge Consulting. I can't think of a better time than now. If you are contemplating a move in stepping up and wanting to become a builder in Victoria, now is a great time to consider getting into contact with Rob and his team. As usual, please check out our Instagram page and other socials, including our YouTube channel, where you'll be able to learn more about our guests and the features of the work that we talk about. Have a great week, and you'll hear me again on the airwaves next week. Thanks for listening to another episode of Build Hatch.
You have experienced a Build Hatch developed production.